Well, I'm Brian Cade, and I've been asked to come and do a workshop, and I've decided to go back in time in some way, and because one thing I'm very interested in, I've got tapes of myself that go back to about 1974, and what I've been very interested in is not only the way I've changed, but the way I haven't changed. And one of the things that I notice most is that I've always used humour, and so I've got a lot of examples both on videotape as well as examples that I can relate about situations where the unexpected, often using humour, seems to have produced a turning point. And I will only talk about cases where I know the outcome. I will never show a tape of a case where I don't know what the long-term outcome is. And so how it will go will partly depend on the audience, and which direction it will go will partly depend on the audience. But overall, I intend to show some pieces of work covering a number of years. In some of them I should look a young and sprightly and slim young man, and then you'll see the gradual ageing process. He got in touch with us. He wanted to go to Wimbledon. The MRI were having a conference in Spain, so he said, would we put on a workshop? And so we said yes, and I met him at the airport, not really knowing what to look at. This little old man came out with a pork pie hat on and a little shuffle. Oh my God. And we got in the car and we started talking, and we were friends instantly. And he came and did a workshop for us. He wasn't actually a very good workshop presenter, but had a razor mind and was wonderful to talk with cases about. And so I used to go to the MRI quite regularly and sit behind the screen with them, and had I think the compliment of being given the honorary position of, in a sense, being a member of the team, rather than just being a visitor and made to sit at the back. And got to know them all quite well. So it's been quite sad for me over the last few years to be writing obituaries for John, and then for Paul Watzlawick, and then more recently for Dick Fish. So in a sense, one of the things I'm going to do today is to I call it rehabilitating pragmatics, to dedicate the day to their memory, because they had such a profound influence on my work. And still, I mean, I've retired now, but up until I retired, it still had a very profound influence, the background of the more of the same. But I really basically met John because he wanted to go to Wimbledon.
And then you became friends
yes.
Subsequently.
Yes, we kept in touch. He stayed with us in Sydney on a couple of occasions, did workshops there. And I was quite often I say often, so sometimes twice a year in Palo Alto, and would stay with him and his wife. And he once actually had he invited me to consult for a man he was seeing in his own room, not as part of the team, because he was stuck with it, which was quite a compliment. And it was quite funny as well, because the man was a professional and had asked John to see him because he so admired John, and they kind of got stuck, I think, in a sort of mentor-client position. And whilst it wasn't planned, we spent most of the time, the client and I, taking the mick out of John, who sat there with his pipe with that look on his face. And I thought it somehow changed the balance. It took John off of the pedestal and allowed them then to discuss things more as equals, and to start ending the therapy. It's an interesting experience.
They were part of the Bateson project initially, and then they moved on to
Bateson. You mean et al.? Yes, John was. Yes, but yes, I think it was only John, because John Jackson died, and Haley went off to work with Mnuchin, and then made his own institute. But John was one of the original so-called Bateson project. He was one of the three that did all the work on families, and Bateson would swan around having esoteric ideas, arcane interests. Because I remember saying to John once, to admitting to him, saying, actually, quite frankly, when I read Bateson, I'm really not quite sure what he's talking about. And he said, actually, between you and me, we never understood what he was talking about either. But he was very good because he would allow us to get on with what we were interested in, and he supported our work. So in that sense, he was a very good leader. Other than that, they never knew what he was talking about half the time. So that was a relief. I think I can't remember the date, it's probably about 79 I met up, so it would have been within like 2 or 3 years. We went to I think the first training conference that Luigi and Gianfranco put on in Brussels, and it was by invitation. And Philippa Seligman and I, we somehow meshed with them. And from then on, we would meet at conferences and spend vast amounts of time in bars discussing things, which sometimes included family therapy. And sort of driving around listening to Albinoni and things like that. But we became actually quite close. It was good fortune at that time to be able to meet these people, because around the same time I met De Shazer. And he was another person that I made a strong friendship with, and another person I sadly recently had to write an obituary for.
So I can remember meeting Steve De Shazer once, having a meal with him, and asking him how did he arrive at his way of working and thinking, and his response to me was, clients.
Yes, and you got the voice right too.
And then he said that Jay Haley's book, I think it was Strategies of
Psychotherapy,
hit him on the head.
No, that was my.
Was that yours?
That's my statement. Yes.
Stole it?
Well, no, he might have done. Yes, it was Lynn Hoffman that asked me once. Philip and I had done a workshop at one of these international things, and Lynn Hoffman said, "Where did you get this Groucho Marx approach to therapy from?" And I said, I was walking down the road to Damascus one day. This green book fell out of the sky and hit me on the head. It was Strategies of Psychotherapy. And I read that and it just changed everything, reading about Erickson. But opening up the possibilities of being more yourself and using different facets of yourself. And it certainly was a license to use what I use a lot of humour. It was in my training, that was a no-no. You know, humour was something to be frowned upon. And to have another 10 years of analysis about, to deal with your oral sadism or whatever they used to call it.
I'm Max von Boventer. I'm here at the Family Institute doing the master's course in systemic psychotherapy. I really like Brian's offbeat sense of humour. He seems to be a maverick, and he seems to be making really genuine, real relationships with his clients. I do like that about him. There's also, I think what I'm taking away most is a sense that because Brian has got quite some charisma about him, and he can pull things off that other people, including myself, probably couldn't pull off, I think what I'm aiming for is not to be copying Brian, not to be the best Brian I can be, but actually to be the best Max I can be in a therapy room.
Actually, I think John Cleese himself said that writing about humour is a way of killing it. I had the ridiculous experience of at a conference with Carl Whittaker. Whittaker was late. So they came to Robin Skinner and I and said, would you mind going up on stage and sort of entertaining the troops as 'twere? And neither of us were very keen on the idea, but we said, okay then, and because we were both known for using humour and absurd, which is what the conference is about. And I was up there answering a question that someone asked about using humour. And as I looked around, I looked down right in front of me was John Cleese. Unfortunately, he was looking up and nodding and smiling. Had he been frowning, I'm not sure quite what I'd have done. I think I would have just crept off the stage. Somehow I think had I miscued it, that would have shown itself a little earlier. But let's okay, say we got to this point and all of a sudden she thought, what will that do? I would have probably come up with something. I don't know, but I had enough trust in myself to know that I would have come up with something. And it probably would have been around, this is a way of breaking a pattern which looks as if it has you under control. Or something like that. I may not use those words, but I would have found a way of...
Bulimia is there's rituals around bulimia.
Yes, it would have been something like breaking the pattern of... Yes.
And you're giving her a new ritual that she has to go through before she can do the other, so it's almost replacing one ritual with another ritual.
You and Philippa did a lot of work in Scandinavia.
I wouldn't say a lot, we went there a couple of times.
A couple of times?
Yes.
Yeah. But you certainly opened up the world of family therapy in the UK. And
I would like to think we made quite, I mean, there were lots of other people. I mean, it was buzzing. There were lots of places, but certainly from using the more MRI derived before we got contaminated with Milan, that we were very sort of we had a unique. There wasn't anybody else that I'm aware of that was teaching and in that kind of style. And then I meshed the two. I thought I found no problem in meshing some aspects of the Milan. I was never sold totally on the Milan approach, whereas the rest of the institute at that time moved wholesale over. I retained loyalty is the wrong word, but it remained my underpinning, that notion of the attempted solution has become the problem, and what we're looking at is repeating patterns, and which both Luigi and Gianfranco approved of. They never wanted people to be acolytes. They were, and so did Steve DeShazer. I have a tape which I might use today with, which I made in Milwaukee. He said, look, don't do a solution focus interview unless it's natural. Just do the way you work the way you would work. And it's very much an MRI derived with my own bits of garnish in.
So it sounds as though there's a lot of freedom in there, but a structure that allows you to work off that freedom.
Yes, the structure is a very simple one, but the implications of it is very profound. And I find it's, whether I'm supervising, I do supervise at the moment, but I'm no longer seeing clients. But it was always the underpin. And for instance, when I'm supervising somebody and they're stuck with a family, almost the first question that comes to my mind is, what have you been trying to do? Or if I were to ask the family, what's this therapist been trying to do? Well, how would they answer? And then you usually get the answer to why you're stuck. The father thinks I'm trying to get him to be more involved with the kids. Right, is it working? No. Okay, so what can you do differently? So that you open up more possibilities. And it will obviously inevitably involve some kind of different way of talking with the father.
Okay, well, I guess the sorts of things that seem, interesting and important to me at the moment are Brian talking about his use of humour in his work. I've really enjoyed that. But it's also making me think about a family I'm working with at the moment. And I suppose the thing that stands out for me is that thing where he talked about pros and cons. And if you colonise your client's pros, then in a way that they can't inhabit that space. And I like that, and it made me wonder how I might use that with my clients. So I'm wondering how I might use it there. Not so much the humour, but the sort of pros and cons and not colonising their space too much.
I remember being struck by the 9-dot problem.
Oh, right.
I can't remember whether it was in Change or whether
Change, I think, yes.
It was in Change, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That idea of thinking literally outside of the box.
And it's surprisingly easy when you know.
One solution that I came across subsequently was lovely. It was a young kid. He said, you just get a huge, big, fat pen and you just do it in
one slice. Yes. The rule which says you can only use straight lines. So if you think, well, to hell with the rule, you can join them together much more easily using curved lines. And I can't remember who gave me that as an analogy, but it seemed a good idea at the time. That why should we think of ourselves in these kind of straitjackets? And,
so coming back to the work that you did with the Milan team, how much was Mara Salvini Palazzoli involved in?
She wasn't.
No.
I met her and she did a workshop in Cardiff, which I organised, but I never worked with her. We also visited her in Milan, but we never actually worked directly with her. When we came across them, it was at the point at which they'd split and gone their different ways. And we asked Mara to come over as a separate person, wasn't with Luigi and Gianfranco. She was delightful, I thought. She was a very bossy woman, a very powerful woman. She was about 1 foot tall. And she was one of those people that would walk into the room and she would be the centre of the room. And I have this lovely memory of having breakfast in Heidelberg, I think it was, at a conference where Michael White was going to give a presentation. And she was going to do a response to it, and she'd written out her response before he'd given the paper. And she was determined that his idea of externalization was just like the old-fashioned idea of demons. She was quite dismissive of. It's quite interesting to hear over breakfast, sort of going through this and saying, "This is terrible. This is just like demonology." But we didn't really work with her. But she and my daughter got on extremely well. And I always remember walking around Llandaff Cathedral, and I was supposed to be driving her to the airport, and she's holding my daughter's hand, and they're looking around the church and looking. And I was saying, Mara, we need to get going soon. And she says, "Be quiet. Abigail and I are talking to each other." So there was I, about 1 foot tall. I'm just the chauffeur. But we didn't actually work with her, and her style had disappeared off into the invariant prescription, which I actually found quite helpful as well. I think there was a lot to be said for that. Excuse me. But it received a lot of flack as well, because it was seen as family blaming, and apparently you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to say that families actually do things wrong. Some of the ones I met did, but somehow that became very non-kosher at that point. And she did sort of go overboard a bit, I think. But that was Mara.
Yeah, I really enjoyed Brian's genuineness and his use of self and his curiosity. And I think that curiosity about clients in general, not just the problem that they bring to counselling, and seeing the client as a holistic person rather than a problem. And what I've got out of today, I think, is looking at the use of the pros and cons. There's something about the diagram on the board that Brian did. It's like a heart shape, and it almost feels like that where the pros and cons overlap is an ingrained part of oneself, something that the client owns and goes very deep, and how just by empathising with that client's internal frame of reference that I could tap into that.
But you ran a project for 10 years almost, researching Milan approach.
I don't know how long it went, but we would meet once a week.
Mm-hmm.
And it was BB, Phil Kingston, and from Bristol University, and myself, and we called it The Project, and we would just test out the ideas, which led to some really fascinating experiences and team struggles, and who has the right to pick up the phone, and who has the best ideas, all those kinds of things. In fact, we wrote about the struggle.
That you and Doug Brunlin had written about the strategic use of telephone.
Oh.
Can you remember the ideas around that, of course, the session?
Yeah, and we used to do things like I'm ringing up, and the therapist picked the phone up and said, "Can I speak to the adolescent, please?" And you'd have a word with the adolescent. You know, how do you think it's going? And I can't actually remember specific examples, but I do remember actually once with Hugh Jenkins was the therapist when he was training with us, and he was working with a woman who had some experience in the field. I'm not quite sure what it was, so knew what role play meant. And she had some fairly unpleasant things happen in her life, and she was needing to make a decision but couldn't make the decision. And Hugh had moved into a helpful mode, and she was yes-butting. So I rang through and suggested that they do a reverse role play, and that she play him and he play her, and for him to yes-but. And so they did that, and it was fascinating. I mean, it was identical. It was the same interview, just the other people doing it. So I then telephoned again, and Hugh picked the phone up, and I said, no, I want to speak to the therapist, please. So he passed the phone over to the woman, and I said, look, your ideas seem very pertinent, but somehow they're not coming across. Why don't you come behind the screen for consultation? So she came behind the screen, said with smugness, I'm just going to speak to my colleagues. And we kept her in role, and we discussed how the ideas were quite, had validity, and she said, well, I think it's probably too soon. Perhaps I'm pushing him to move too quickly. And said, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. So we helped her to construct an intervention. So she went back and gave this intervention. And then she asked him if he'd like another appointment, and he said yes. So made this appointment, got to the door, and didn't know which way one of them should go. But what was interesting, of course, as you would guess, she then took her own advice, and substantially not resolved, but made significant decisions between how she had been at the beginning of the session and how she was at the end. And we did that a couple of times.
Yeah, I'm Sarah Wheatcroft, and I'm coming up to the end of my first year of the 2-year MSc training here at the Family Institute. So I was really keen to come and see Brian Kay today. I particularly enjoyed because I'm in training here. A lot has resonated. I'm starting to think much more about those sorts of ideas that Brian's been bringing up to do with my actual clients, and particularly the yes but that he mentioned. It amused me because I've had examples where I've had clients who've particularly come up with those sorts of answers when I've been trying to be helpful and useful in therapy, particularly in some group work, and they've been saying, yes but, and it just resonated for me because there's a way that you can learn, and the wisdom that Brian's brought to today is that in a way you have to go with that, and I think it sort of reinforces the idea of the joining with your client, so the building of the therapeutic relationship, very, very important. So I've really taken that from today, yeah.
Brian would always say that, I don't know what I'm going to do today. I'll know when the workshop's finished.
Yes.
This afternoon.
Yeah, I'm sort of lying, but not lying. I obviously know what I'm going to cover. In the sense, I have to choose what tapes to bring. Well, not tapes. That shows my age, doesn't it?
Sure.
DVDs to bring. But how it will go. Well, it starts off with a sleepless night, and me cursing myself, thinking, why don't I prepare in the same way as other people do? Why don't I have PowerPoint? I should do have one, but with some cartoons on it. But that never worked for me. And once I did try it, I made a total pig's ear of it because it wasn't me.
Hi, I'm Jill Lubienski. I'm on the Master's course here at the Family Institute, and I'm also working part-time for Action for Children. That's one of the big reasons for coming, so that we can kind of catch up on everybody's positions, where they are, what's happening. And then, of course, to see somebody like Brian Cade, who I haven't seen before, but I am kind of just keen to learn a bit more about him, and I've really enjoyed his use of himself in the work, and that's just something that I'm quite interested in at the moment. So that's the bit that I'm kind of picking up on most, I think. Don't be afraid to be yourself. Don't do what I do, but learn from what I do. So it's about being part of a community, which I know is an important part of the thing that the Family Institute try to do, and I think they succeed in doing on days like this.
So I would hope that, coming back to your original question, that we can have, it's called a conversation, isn't it, nowadays? Is that what you do?
Apparently,
In old days we used to talk to each other, but apparently you have conversations now. Except you have to say it correctly. I understand it has to be said with a degree of reverence. You have a conversation. Is that right?
Sounds about it. Yeah.
Good. I know. I want to have it accurate.
Well, shall we talk some more later?
I could do, yes. Over a glass of wine.
That sounds great.
Okay.
Cheers, Brian.
Did that give you what you wanted?